Joining me now is Director of the Threat Information Office at the Center for Security Policy, Kyle Shideler. Kyle, hi, how are you?
Good to be here, Liz. Thanks for having me.
Kyle, it's always good to see you. Let's start with the question of the day. As I stated in the intro, the Iraqi forces are continuing their siege to retake Mosul. Jihadists are expected to return to their home countries. So, Kyle, I guess my question is, will that dispersion of terrorists from the center of their caliphate, will any of those terrorists reach America?
I think there's a risk that they will, Liz. What we're looking at now is a major effort underway to sort of uproot Islamic State from Mosul, which is what was a city of 2 million people, so it's a fairly large area, and it was a fairly large holding for Islamic State. Now we have to remember, when we're talking about Islamic State, we're talking about not only fighters, but also women and even children that traveled to serve the caliphate at the call of Caliph Baghdadi. So we have not just fighters who may be killed in the attack, but what are ostensibly civilians, but they're literally Islamic State civilians, and they're supporters of Islamic State. So as people return to their home countries, how are they going to be treated? Are they going to be indicted? Are they going to be tried and held in prison for traveling to join Islamic State? In some cases, probably. In other cases, maybe not. Looking at, for example, Sweden, where they have already discussed the possibilities of doing a reintegration program to provide ISIS fighters with housing and driver's licenses and similar entitlements in order to ease them back in to Swedish life. This is highly problematic, not just for Sweden, of course, but also for us.
Right, and problematic is a nice word to use there. I can think of some entitlements that ISIS fighters deserve, some nice housing behind bars that may be more suited to their needs right now. But Kyle, let me ask you this. You're talking about these civilians. I think a lot of the media is calling them supporters of ISIS. There could be up to 2,000 of them in Mosul at this time, but they are leaving the city. Al-Baghdadi has told the wives and the children of the ISIS fighters that it's time to leave. They're leaving, but what we see, and we actually have a picture of this, there have been some ISIS militants who are also leaving the city. They're trying to flee Mosul dressed as women.
That's a very common tactic, and I expect we'll see more of it before the battle for Mosul ends. So we're looking at, some pretty serious fighters that are going to be looking to get out of Mosul. Now, are they going to move into Syria to try and hold on to Raqqa, or are they going to try to move into Western Europe and ultimately into the United States in order to conduct revenge attacks? I think one of the things we need to be careful about as we move in on Islamic State is that there has been a lot of fighting in the recent years, and Islamic State fighters have learned a lot. They've learned a lot about committing terrorism. They've learned a lot about jihadist attacks. They could become the sort of next, what used to be called the Afghans. Those were the veterans of the Afghan war against the Russians, who became really the creme de la creme of jihadist violence in the 80s and 90s. So we could see that happen again with sort of Syrian alumni becoming the specialists in jihadist terror coming out of what's the ostensible defeat of Islamic State. Right,
but we've seen that already. It seems that one radical Islamic terror group morphs into another when the organization itself has been dispersed. That's what happened. That's how ISIS came to be. They were part of al-Qaeda. Then when al-Qaeda was demolished, those experts in terrorism, in jihad, became what we know as ISIS. Kyle, let me ask you this. As I said in the introduction, the Security Commissioner for the European Union has been warning European nations about these returning jihadists. But let me ask you about the method here. You mentioned before that you didn't know whether they were going to be put in jail, whether they'd be welcomed back. You said Sweden has even had a program to help them reintegrate back into their normal life, I suppose. But what about the threat of refugees here, where they're not identifying themselves as returning jihadists, where they're just saying, oh, I'm a refugee from this war-torn area? Are we going to see militants wanting to wage jihad on Western nations, disguising themselves as refugees?
I think we have to assume that's a threat, Liz. You know, we've already seen, for example, an Iraqi refugee was found guilty for his role in supplying explosives to Iraqi fighters who killed Americans during the Iraq War. So we've already seen cases where refugees have been involved in terrorism, and I think we're liable to see more of it as we move forward. The speed with which the Obama administration has insisted on moving refugees into the country is really such that vetting has become almost impossible, and that's assuming that we had the sort of intelligence resources that we would need in order to conduct such a vetting. I think it's impossible to say that we have those resources or that we are doing that vetting, and as a result, the risk is very high that we will see terrorists moving in and among that refugee population. And the question, as we continue to take this territory, will be how do we move refugees back? Will we, with the absence of ISIS, will this territory be a place that Iraqis and Syrians can return to?
Right, and that will be interesting. But just going back to what you said at the beginning of your answer, I think we all know that we don't have the proper resources to vet these refugees. It's not just on us. That's not just on us. It's the fact that these countries where the refugees are coming from don't have the information on their own people to be able to provide to us. And it's not just Republicans that think that. We know from the WikiLeaks emails that Hillary Clinton is well aware of the fact that our vetting capacity is subpar too. Kyle, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's always great to talk to you. All right, guys, we'd like to know your thoughts on the matter too. Tweet me at Liz_Wheeler, and we'll be back in 1 minute.